Hi, everyone. We are here. Thank you for hanging in with us. We went a little bit late on that last presentation, but we're here with you now. And last but very much not least is Jesse and Mark with Sam's Tours and Jesse Alpert. Is it Jesse Alpert Photography? Or I've been following your stuff, Jesse, but do you have a website or something?
I registered it as Alpert Pictures.
There we go, Output Pictures, and it's some beautiful, beautiful stuff. So I'm super excited here. So I am going to hand you over right now to Jesse and Mark.
So, guys, hello again. And for those of you who have joined us before, thank you for coming back. And for those of you that are new to jumping in on one of these with us, welcome. And we hope everybody is safe and doing okay. We know there's a lot going on around the world right now, and just so everybody knows, our hearts and prayers go out to everyone, all things encompassing going on around the world from Sam's Tours. So for those of you who, some of you may know me and some of you may not have joined already, my name is Mark Baumann. I'm the Vice President of Sam's Tours in Palau. And with me today is Jesse Alpert, who has been with us for quite some time and just an amazing photographer. And Jesse came to us originally as a guide and doing all that kind of stuff, and now he's become his work is just incredible. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit today about Peleliu, World War II, and the commemoration of D-Day, and how that all impacted through Palau. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse and let him go. And then at the very end, we'll take questions. Anybody has any questions or anything going on, we'll be there. So, all right, Jesse, have at it, buddy.
Great. Hey, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to Carrie and Deep Blue Adventures for hosting and asking me to come, and Mark for asking me to do my presentation. I've got several slides to go through, so I'll try and go through quickly, but not too quickly. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all the servicemen and women across our nation and across other nations for everything they've done and continue doing. I'm talking all about World War II history, so it's very relatable to all those people. This is a two-part presentation. The first is going to be focusing on the wrecks of Palau and the operation involved that resulted in all of them sinking. The second part will be about Peleliu and the operation that took place in Peleliu. So without further ado, let's get right into it. If you don't know where Palau is about 500 miles east of the Philippines, just about here. Okay. We mainly all live in Koror. Koror is right in the middle. It's a smaller island. And then Babeldaw is the larger island, mainly rainforest. Most of the diving we do is down in this area or out in Oolong. The famous rock islands are here. And then the island of Peleliu down here. As Mark said, I've been at Sam's for a while. I've been there since 2013 with Sam's Tours and Unique Dive Expeditions, brought in with Paul Collins and Richard Barnden. Richard and Paul taught me everything I know about photography and videography and took me on all these wrecks a lot and taught me all they know. So I'm very appreciative to them as well as Sam's Tours. Right now I'm in the States, working on my way to get back to Palau. So we'll see when I get back. This is what Koror might have looked like in the early 1920s. It had around 12,000 people. Nowadays it has about 12,000 people. The really quick history for Palau was much like other colonial places in the world. It was basically taken by Spain way back in the early 1700s and before. It was then sold to Germany for $4 million, and then Japan took it in 1914, and it was officially given to them in 1918 as a part of the Treaty of Versailles. As you can see, in the 20s, it was very developed. They actually installed a monorail, had over 2,500 buildings, and back in the 20s and 30s, it had about 6,000 people. They called it Chisai Tokyo, meaning Little Tokyo. Here's a photo from back then. an overview of what Koror looked like. And we can see pretty clearly here, we have a hospital, school, boathouses. Apparently this was a 90-woman brothel. So when you have 20, over 20,000 troops stationed in the town, you need that. Commercial Koror. We have some storage, radios, and in the middle here we have raised buildings from bombardment from US military. And then the slums. The Japanese did not exactly treat many of the other nations they invaded very well. The Palauans, like many other, their population was decimated back in the day. The 4 major islands of Koror were all connected by bridges back in the day. We still actually use those causeways now. To get to the big island, to Koror, you would have to take a ferry back then. Now they've built a bridge. And this is what Koror looks like now. As you can see, we still have the main road going right down the middle, a little less trees and some bigger buildings, and now we have a baseball field. In the 1940s for Japan during the war, Japan utilized Palau as mainly a naval supply base. So they were doing lots of things like cargo ships and tankers and repair ships and hospital ships and things of that nature. This is a photo of one of my favorite wrecks. The reason it's one of my favorites is because it photographs really well. Because outside the lagoon, the water is a bit clearer. This is the Teshio Maru. It's an army cargo transport ship. You're going to see a lot of vessels in Palau. The wrecks are, like I said, tankers and cargo carriers. We have one battleship up north. It's in pieces. And during the war, they would basically move the battleships and the carriers in through Palau and then out. This is another photo of transport. So we have a rotary engine here. This is stored in the depth charge wreck or the helmet wreck. This engine's about the size of a good-sized computer desk. One of my favorite wrecks, this is about 10 minutes away from Koror, around the corner. This is a very small plane, but it's super cool to dive, and it's only in 12 meters of water. The Americans identified them as a Jake seaplane, and it's actually an Aichi E-13A single-engine twin-float long reconnaissance plane. I've taken many guests here for photos and videos, and it's very, very fun. One of the best things about the wrecks in Palau that we can see are a lot of the king posts and parts of the wreck are really shallow. So we can get really good lighting, and then all of them have coral growth on them. So lots of coral growth. You can see a clam up there. And always a good time to see what's there. So back in the day, the Japanese were focused on air defense around Palau. They recognized the American air superiority. And Palau in general and Peleliu are like walking museums, basically. There's stuff everywhere. These Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft guns are basically visible around town. There's one in the parking lot of my you can go up north to one of the Japanese stations. There's tanks there, and as well up north, one of the states, Nurmalui, there's a site called Hodai. This translates approximately to battery, and it was basically an artillery battery. And they have these huge, amazing 140mm cannons. They're the same type of cannons that they would use on some of the vessels. So you can drive about 45 minutes up north to see these, and there's a couple in bunkers as well as ones just sitting out in the open. As I said, these cannons are very similar to the ones used on the naval vessels. This is a photo taken of one of my favorite wrecks called the Iro. The Iro has 2 of these guns on it, one on the bow and one on the stern. They're basically the same as the ones on land, except they have a rotatable turret on them. Another shot on the right, this one here, is the Iro with the king post in front, and we have one of our dive guides, Lulu, swimming in front. On the left here, we have a photo of the oil hold of the Amatsu Maru, which is a massive 160-meter oil tanker that is about 5 minutes from Sam's Tours and Koror. This is another shot from inside a tanker. You might notice something a bit off with this one. The needles happen to be upside down. That would be because this is the sister ship to the Iro, the Sata, exactly the same, except she sank upside down. So like I said, Palau was a naval supply base. So we didn't have many battleships or carriers there, which is why I showed you that. At this time, 1943, September 1943, we have Japan shifting their strategy in the war. They had realized that they had, quote, awoken a sleeping giant. So they shifted from an offensive strategy to a defensive strategy. They called this their absolute national defense zone. And basically what they were doing was moving about 80,000 troops to these lines across here to counter General MacArthur's advance. So we have MacArthur's advance here. His famous quote, "I shall return to the Philippines." So at this point, just before the Operation Desecrate, which was March 31st, March 30th, March 31st, 1944, we have already had the Battle of Midway, Guadalcanal, and there's basically a turning point in the war. So we have the Americans pushing towards Japan. After Palau, the road would continue to Saipan, Guam, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. And this would be their horse. They called it the Fast Carrier Attack Force. It was developed by Admiral Michener, and it was arguably the most powerful fleet ever amassed at the time. They called it Task Force 58. I believe we just had Brandy beforehand talking about Truk Lagoon. This is the same task force that is responsible for sinking all of the ships there. They would be absolutely dominant. The most important number to see here is the 700 combat aircraft. And those would come out of 3 separate groups. They broke the task force into 3 major parts. It would be 4 carriers, 4 carriers, and 3 carriers. And each of those would be surrounded by heavy cruisers and battleships and submarines, and basically form a screen. And they would try and move this group of ships as quickly as they could through the ocean and make quick strikes. Quick example of one of the carriers. The carriers were the most important part of the fleet, obviously. I picked the Enterprise because, yeah, I'm kind of a huge Trek nerd, so my favorite one. Throw some quick numbers at you right off the bat. 2,217 man crew, about 800 feet long, and 90 aircraft. Those are the important numbers we want to take away from that. And this is kind of what we're rolling with now. This is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. It's over 1,000 feet long, and it now runs on nuclear reactors, and it has a 6,000 man crew. Right now we're developing the Gerald Ford class carrier, and that one is very similar in size and aircraft, but it cuts the crew in half. So they're trying to automate systems as much as they can. So more about Operation Desecrate in particular. Operation Desecrate was March 30th, March 31st. It was supposed to be April 1, but they bumped it up a bit early because the admiral in charge of Palau had heard that the attack was coming, and as a result started moving some of his more valuable ships out of Palau to sort of aim for a naval combat instead of an air combat. They realized that if they parked their most important ships close, they would not be in a well-suited position to fight on a naval battle. So we have the 3 main points here: destroy enemy aircraft, sink naval and merchant shipping, and laying aerial mines. They would do this in successive sorties. So they would basically send out planes every hour from every ship. And that would be A, B, C, or 1A, 1A, 2A, 1B, 2B. And those sorties would be continued for 48 hours straight. And they would have various missions. The mining operation is not talked about that much. Mostly it wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be, but that's hard to exactly say because they did have delayed mines on a lot of them. Half the point of the mining operation was basically to allow Palau not to be used even after the US forces left. So there were only 3 main channels coming in and out of Palau for the Japanese. So with the different assortment of mines and different fuses, they covered all these channels to block the entrances in and out. in the beginning of the battle and after they left. The US forces would use many different kinds of mines. I'm just going to talk about these two. These are the two main ones I would find most of. The Mark 10 Mod 6 is a needle type magnetic, which would be, so they would launch it and drop it and it would sink below about 30 feet of the water line. And a certain ship would pass over. And if it was big enough, maybe it would set off the magnetic needle. The Mark 25 mine, through successive different models, they would combine triggers. They would do an acoustic trigger, a pressure trigger, or a magnetic trigger, or any combination, so that maybe if a small minesweeper ship went over it, it didn't set it off. But if a large tanker went off, then maybe it could. Some of the fuses were laid for 30-day late fuses, so they would only go off a month later when ships were possibly coming in and out. We don't have a lot of photos of the mines, at least I haven't seen a lot of photos of the mines, but we do have something really cool is in helmet wreck, or depth charge wreck, people call it. This is a wreck right around the corner from Sam's, full of depth charges. Those are all depth charges in the middle of the wreck. And you can see it's basically blown out on the side here with like rib cages from the ship coming. Here's a close-up of some of the depth charges. Luckily, all the detonators are stored somewhere else. And we have a cleared ground demining team and other, I believe, Japanese projects that have come in to try and encase some of them, the more dangerous ones that might be leaking some sort of chemicals. So we do go to that wreck, but it's advised you don't take your mask off. This is another shot on helmet. Some of the people have started moving stuff. So they started putting artifacts kind of out a bit in the open, and you can just see piles of artifacts right in the back, right in the stern of the ship. Cleaning basin, a light bulb here, a frying pan, there's a gas mask, sake bottles. This is an ammo box. There's a rifle laying around somewhere else. There's all kinds of artifacts on this one. It's very fun and shallow as well. So the Desecration, that was an absolute, I mean, for the American forces, a smashing success. Quickly look down, the American forces lost. Those were almost all planes that they ditched into the ocean themselves, because the planes they were using were so cheaply made and so efficient that it was, the pilot was worth more. So if the plane had a problem, they were instructed to ditch the plane, save the pilot. This number here, between 110 and 214 aircraft shot down, that's debated because the naval archives and the military archives are pretty imperfect. It's hard to say when they shot a plane down if it was, you know, smoking, if it actually went down or not. You can see here in the middle, this is Malakal. This is part of Karor, where actually Sam's Stores is located. You can see the big black smoke billowing out. That's most likely due to an ammo dump being hit or something. Part of the reason Operation Desecrate went so well was the Japanese basically left it. They kind of just admitted the fact that it was going to get destroyed. Admiral Koga, in charge of the Japanese Navy, left. He just left. He flew to the Philippines on his seaplane, which ironically went down in a typhoon a couple of days later. So I think the karma was pretty instant with him. He moved his super battleship a bit north, like I said, for naval warfare. And as a result, the island of Palau was pretty decimated by the Japanese. This is right around the corner from Karor, where you take most of the boats out from down this way. And we can see 5 vessels really quick, right in the same area. This is the most famous one we go to here, the Iro, right next to her, her sister ship, the Sata. The Nagi-san behind. The Kamikaze was a torpedo transport, and the Bishu Maru is an army transport ship. So that's just 5 of the many vessels that are right around the corner that we go to all the time when we dive in Palau. This is from the US Naval Archives. There are tons of images. I found a lot of video, but the images just seemed a bit more sharp to me. The video just seemed kind of hazy and quick, and I have limited time on the presentation. So I just stuck with pictures for this one. You can see the Matsu Maru being hit in the distance here, and this is Karor in the distance behind that plane. Here's another shot of the Amatsu Maru going down with a huge oil slick next to it. And I love pictures like these because I pull these out when I do briefings for people or presentations like this, because when you dive the wreck and you show them a picture of the wreck right beforehand of what it was, it's much more relatable. And when you're on the wreck, you can really kind of appreciate what it was and where you are in that moment. A lot of people's favorite wreck in Palau is the Iro, sometimes called the Iro Maru, which is actually incorrect. It is a Japanese naval vessel. It's proper IJN material. They commissioned it, they built it, so it is Japanese Navy. It's not a Maru vessel. A Maru vessel, for the Japanese terms, would be a merchant. They would basically take a merchant vessel and say, okay, you are now work for the Navy, and they stuck a gun on it. We have lots of those around here that basically were cargo ships that turned into military cargo ships. Cool takeaway in this picture is this superstructure here, because I have a couple other photos and you can kind of really see the difference. This is the report when they nailed the engine room, I think, right before it started going down, the black smoke billowing out of the engine room. And then here we have the shot of the ship actually going down. So like I said, that superstructure before seemed pretty solid. This is the superstructure now with the diver in front. Thank you, Lulu, for posing. Great job. So we usually swim through that superstructure, but on top of it, there's lots of coral, and you'll see in the video later I have, it's getting pretty heavy on there. That superstructure in the middle is collapsing a bit. This is the stern gun, another shot of the stern gun, the 140 millimeter cannon. There's one on the bow and the stern. The stern one has a bit less growth on it, so it's a bit more visible. And then right underneath this gun, you can go in, and in a full circle, you can go around this piece. And this is the auxiliary steering apparatus. So they would manually steer the ship. On the opposite part of the ship, this is on the bow. In one of the forward holds, you can go all the way to the bottom. All the way to the bottom on this one is about 37 meters. And in the bottom of the hold, you can find these really cool boxes of sake bottles, and they're surrounded by some gas masks. So all in all, Operation Desecrate, overwhelming success for the American forces. You can see here, this is approximate 36 priority. In likelihood, it was around 40 that got hit, and maybe we dive a dozen of them. They're in good condition. The Wakataki is interesting, but it is mainly rubble. The Sata, the Iro, the Amatsu, the Urakami, the Kamikaze, the Chuyo, the Bishu, and the Teshio are our top ones. Amazing wrecks to dive. They unfortunately have mostly been salvaged. I have a little bit of info of that in my video, which I'm about to go into. And in the 60s, it was the Fujita salvaging company that would come in, 50s and 60s, that would come in and literally cut apart a lot of the ships and take a lot of the more interesting artifacts that we want to see. So unfortunately, unlike Truck Lagoon, which is kind of littered with artifacts, ours are a bit rarer to find things still in the ship, unless you go really far inside. Quick plug right before I show the video. The video is only about 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and I'll just talk over it. I can tell you guys what you're looking at, what we're doing. This is where I got so much of my data from these two books. So huge shout out to Rod McDonald and Dan Bailey for putting in all the hard work. If you want some more stories about this stuff, like helmet wreck, Rod McDonald spent tons of time trying to ID what the ship actually is. He believes it's the Nishu Maru, number 5, after a long search with lots of artifacts and history. It's a great read if that's your kind of thing. The Dan Bailey book is pretty data heavy, but it's also got some really good information. So without further ado, I'm going to throw on a short video I made of the wrecks in Palau. Working?
You can see it. Go ahead and press play.
Cool. Sorry about that, guys.
No, you're good.
So that was the Jake seaplane right in the beginning, the quick one, right? 10 meters. And now we have the bow of the Eero coming on. That's the bow gun. Just some little data about it. 143 meters long. Quite big. Those are the beautiful king posts you can swim through. Thanks, Neil. Good job, Neil. Looking good. Neil's one of our dive guides. Has been there before me. 1922. So that ship had been around quite a while. It came to Palau. It was limping into Palau. It already had a big hole in its bow from a submarine hit. You can see all that massive, beautiful coral growth on top of the superstructure there. That is adding literal tons of weight to the superstructure, and it's certainly collapsing on some parts. So we used to swim through a corridor of the superstructure. We no longer do that just for safety reasons. Luckily, the stern is a bit better condition. Again, here's that 140 millimeter cannon. Here's the one on the bow, on the stern. Bit clearer viz on this day. Our wrecks are all in the lagoon, so except the Teshio, sorry. So the viz is pretty hit or miss. We can get some great days where you can see most of the ship halfway down, and some days where you basically can't dive it, depending on what the tide is doing and what some of the sediment is doing. Right here we have Matt Boyle, who is one of my colleagues in Palau. He and I do a ton of diving. Right now he's diving a JJ CCR, and thanks to Mark and Sam's, we got to go out for a couple of days and make this video. This is a cool shot. We're on the prop of the Amatsu. That is the actual propeller of the Amatsu, and it's one single piece of the prop is about the size of a small car. That was at about 40 plus meters. We're inside the fuel pump room now of the Amatsu. See a nice stairway corridor going down. The fuel pump room is probably the most amazing part. This one's a bit deeper. The Amatsu is one of the deeper wrecks. Most of the other ones are easy recreational. This one, I'd say, if you want to spend any time on it, I would be doing some tech diving, at least a twin set or a bailout, and preferably a rebreather. That's a safe on the bridge, the burned out bridge on top. You can see the floorboards burned out here, and that's an empty safe. So unfortunately, we didn't find Yamato's gold. My favorite, the Teshio through the viz. Right now I'm using a filter. That's why I'm getting some great colors. And for this one, it's super shallow. So we switched over to open circuit. Get some side mount going because we can fit through some of these really tiny Japanese sized doors. And both of us just enjoy diving side mount more. So this is looking down. This wreck lies on her top, so we're looking down on the wreck there with Matt below me. Huge bomb hole right there in the side of the ship. This one's torn apart, and the Fujita Salvage Company really did a number on this one. You can see when you go towards one end of the ship, it looks like a third of it's gone because they just cut out a bunch of the metal. And the Chuyo. The Chuyo is almost swimming distance from Sam's Tours. It's about 5 minutes away from our dock, so we go there a lot. Right there, Matt was looking at the stern gun, the 4.5-inch gun, and now we're going down into the engine room. I don't know if you notice, like I said, in the lagoon, you can see the piles of silt in some of these wrecks. It's a little tricky. We have to be a little cautious when going in and out, especially for the filming. You know, I kind of had one shot. You get one and done. This is cool. We have the compass right here. So on the Chuyo, we can actually have still see the compass, and then below it on this deck here, just below, we have the telegraph still intact. You can go see. This is going down one of the corridors of the Chuyo. And then a quick pan to a quick shot change back to the Eero, just to use my steam stack shot. Yeah, so I'll post that video up separately if anyone wants to watch it again, watch for the subtitles or the information. along with this recording. Now I'll go back to where I was. All right. Everyone can see that?
Yep.
Yep. All right, good. So the second part is focusing on Operation Stalemate 2. So this part doesn't really talk about the Rex that much. So if you're really only interested in the Rex, I understand if you want to tune out for this one, no worries. Operation Stalemate was known as the second bloodiest battle in the Pacific Theater after Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima had something like 60,000 casualties, and half of those were KIA or MIA. And Operation Stalemate had about 30,000 casualties. And it's been adapted to several books and movies, namely The Pacific, put out by HBO, which is a fantastic series if you're interested in that. And we go to Peleliu to dive, mainly. The diving down the southern tip of Peleliu is absolutely incredible for the fish life. And when I go on Peleliu on the island, or I do the land tours, we do land tours for everything on the island. It's almost eerie. The island itself is like a giant memorial. There's basically still remnants of the war on every part of it. Again, there was a lot of video footage out there for this, but for my purposes in the presentation, I find it easier to use the pictures. If you want to check out some video of the Peleliu battle, it's rough. There's a lot of it on YouTube. It actually is a really good source. This was what was known as the bitterest battle of the war for the Marines. The first Marines were legendary against the Japanese. They were terrified of them. And this was the worst day for them up until Iwo Jima. It was under command of Major General William Rupertus, who was famous for quoting, "Serious reconnaissance was deemed unnecessary." I think he would eat those words 2 months later. As you can see here, they anticipated a 4-day assault, and it resulted in 73 days of fighting. So why? Why did they have to go there? As I said before, Palau was kind of on the road to the Philippines. So when MacArthur was going to the Philippines, they wanted to absolutely protect his flank, and they didn't want to leave an island behind them, basically. They would leave themselves open to air assault or some kind of other raid. And frankly, they thought it was going to be easy. It was 6 square miles. It's only 3 by 2. So they thought it was going to be quick and easy. Unfortunately for the American forces, this is the first place that the Japanese would start using their cave systems. Elaborate cave systems. They had given up their beach defenses in favor of this due to the American bombardment strategy beforehand, which was devastating. This is the entrance to what's called the 1,000-man cave. We have the 1,000-man cave here. This is the cleared ground demining team I mentioned before. I've spoken with some of them. They've told me that they clear sometimes up to 2,000 pieces of live ordnance a year. You can see here 582 items removed from the single cave, and there's stuff just lying around inside the cave. I don't know if the 2,000 number is continuous, if they still disarm that many things. I know recently they were doing construction on the road in Koror, and they pulled out a 1,000-pound bomb, which they had to defuse, which was just sitting under the road. Here's a picture of the cave inside. Now, when I'm inside, I have to duck down like this. I'm about 6 feet tall. It's quite tiny. I would not want to be in there for any long periods of time. And these caves are basically honeycombed through the entire island, mainly in one place, Bloody Nose Ridge, quite particular, had many cave systems. Inside, they had corridors, and then off the corridors, they have little rooms. And basically, the rooms would be sleeping quarters or a medical quarter. And in this one, they have an oxygen bottle still there, a Band-Aid just lying on the ground, an old wrench, some shoe soles, all kinds of artifacts just lying in these caves. And you can go on these tours if you visit Palau. Once we can all visit places again. And you can go check out Peleliu Adventures. If you go through anyone. They'll coordinate a tour with you. Check out Des. He's the man. He knows more than anyone else about this stuff on the island, and he'll take you on a great tour. So as I said, they switched to these honeycomb cave systems because of the bombardment. They were absolutely decimating. They were nicknamed a Spruance haircut after Admiral Spruance. They were very effective up until this moment. They were believed in Peleliu that they were actually running out of targets. Unfortunately, they just weren't hitting anything. So we have two main areas where the US forces assaulted. We have Orange Beach and White Beach, and this primary assault started on September 15th, 1944. After they expected to take the beach in about an hour, and after the first day, they had already lost about 900. So it was right off the bat not going very well. The Japanese counterstrike happened quickly as soon as they came ashore, and they were trying to push towards the airfield as quickly as they could. This is Orange Beach now. It was beautiful because there's trees. They bombarded the island so badly that they basically took out all of the foliage. And as a result, it was incredibly hot. It was something like 115 degrees. For those of you in Europe who don't use Fahrenheit or other places, about 46 Celsius. You go to Orange Beach now, you can still see tank treads sitting in here. There's cannons. It's still in some of the caves right next to it. Like I said, it's like a living memorial. We dive off Orange Beach quite a bit. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. 95% coral coverage nowadays, and artifacts just lying around. Here's a pile of bullets. Here's some sort of craft, I believe, could have been a landing craft of some kind left over with a large shell right in front of it. I don't know what kind of shell, and I'm not going to touch it. So great dive guide Miles from PDA actually swimming through the structure. You can see how big it is. And then here's the plug to some of the materials that if you want to read more about Peleliu, these are very interesting. The book over here with the Old Breed by Sledge, and the Pacific, which is kind of based off that book. One excerpt I took from PFC, Private First Class Robert Leckie, talking about the heat, because I was trying to explain how miserable this could have been, complicated by the fact that the US forces did not have enough water. So this is from Robert Leckie. It was hot. The white sand burned through our clothing. It was the enervating heat of the steam room. The sweat slid into one's mouth to aggravate thirst. The water in our canteens was hot, and when I had drunk it all, the sweat, I filled it with dirty rainwater lying in shell craters. Peleliu has no water. The Japanese caught theirs in cisterns open to the sky, and ours had been floated to us in gasoline drums, from which some fool supply officer had neglected to cleanse the residuary oil. The taste of gasoline was undrinkable. So the US forces had sent their Marines to a tiny island with no water and no trees, 115 degrees of heat, and they gave them water that had gasoline in it. It wasn't a great start. Now they pushed towards the airfield. The reason we're down here is to capture these airfields to protect the flank. So whole goal of the mission is to get this airfield. This is what it looks like now. They actually still land planes on it. Just little Cessnas or little biplanes that can safely land on it. This is a close-up of the actual airfield itself. You can see tank treads still markings still pushed into the actual airfield. Right around the corner from the airfield, you can go check out some bunkers. It's a Japanese bunker, and you can see this wall right in front. That was protect from grenades or artillery blasts going in the door, and to basically make a corridor for when anyone wanted to attack the bunker. Just around the corner from the airfield is this 200 millimeter cannon. You go up a cliff kind of, and then into a bit of a cave. It was very well protected, and apparently this cannon was absolutely decimating. It was one of the worst things for the troops when they were sitting on the airfield trying to invade. So now we get to Bloody Nose Ridge, or Umurbrogol Mountain, and the Japanese basically had slanted entrances to protect against grenades and flamethrowers. Flamethrowers were highly utilized in Peleliu. Like I said, this would be nicknamed Bloody Nose Ridge. After the Americans took the airfield, they would begin actually using the airfield themselves to do reconnaissance missions and launch sorties with Corsairs to basically launch bombs against the Japanese. Still couldn't find them in all these caves, which is the big problem. One particular day in Bloody Nose Ridge resulted in 71% casualties for the 1st Battalion of the 1st Marines over one hill. At this point, the 81st Infantry were called in for relief. And after 9 days, so D-Day of Peleliu plus 9, they had finally taken everything except Bloody Nose Ridge in this tiny area that they called the Pocket. On November 24th, so 73 days engagement, the commander of the Japanese forces, Nakagawa, proclaimed, "Our sword is broken and we have run out of spears." He then burnt his regimental colors and performed ritual suicide, as was customary with Japanese military. They did not surrender. I believe the Japanese had somewhere around 12,000 casualties and maybe 200 surrendered. I have the numbers at the end of the presentation confirm that. When you go tour to Bloody Nose Ridge on the way, like I said, there's artifacts just on the side. They have a pathway set for you. It's pretty recommended that you stay on the path, as there's live ordnance around the area. You can see a rifle here on the ground. Here is a disarmed bomb of some kind. You can see it's opened up. They've taken out the ordnance, and a close-up of this rusted rifle. And here's from the top of Bloody Nose Ridge. You can see now the vegetation obviously completely back, and we're actually looking out at the blue corner right there. Like I said, the bloody aftermath. So 10,695 Japanese were killed in action, 202 were captured. They did not surrender. That was not their way. So it was absolutely horrendous fighting. And they don't really know if it was worth it in the end. They didn't really use the airfield that much. They, what they did do was secure the flank and really learn about the shifting tactics of the Japanese. This would be the first place they'd see the cave systems, and they would have to prepare better for these for invasions in Saipan and Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and possibly Japan itself. Here's some more of what Peleliu looks like today. This is outside the museum. So I believe this was a dispensary or a medical building of some kind, and you can see the absolute decimation from the bombardments there. And then they put up some more rebar and plexiglass so they could actually have AC in the museum. Inside the museum is just loaded with artifacts. I think they're almost running out of room at some point. You can see just stuff lined up. This is just outside the museum. We have large bombs, maybe a mine somewhere in the back. This is an American amphibious tractor, also known as an LVT, or a landing vehicle tract. They had many different kinds through the war, and this one in Peleliu possibly could have been designed to mount flamethrowers. That was one of the additions they made in Peleliu. Something cool about this sprocket right here that goes to the tread, it still spins. You can go up to it and it still spins. So it's a nice credit to American engineering. And then right on the airfield, actually, we have a Japanese Type 95 tank, a light tank. This was the most numerous armored vehicle made by Japan. They started making it in 1933. We have aircraft all over the island from both nations. And one of the cooler small things that I found that I felt comfortable actually touching, a bomb shackle, you can see manufactured in Arlington, New Jersey. Here's the Japanese headquarters. You can go visit and walk around. And there's memorials on several parts of the island to all the troops on both sides. There's memorials for the 81st Infantry, the Marines, and all the Japanese divisions. There's a beautiful temple up top both countries have ceremonies from time to time commemorating these troops and servicemen and women. It's a pretty touching place for a lot of people. And you go there and you can feel it around you. I know I go there, I sit down, I eat lunch, and I just picture what could have been happening around me 80 years ago or 60 years ago. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you guys learned something in the history. And now I'm happy to take questions about anything with Mark. It's so funny for me to be talking about wrecks all the time with Palau, because people always want to come here and see sharks and fish and squishy stuff, basically.
That's right.